Mated to the Lycan King. Part 7. Kieran stood at the foot of the palace steps, gazing into the early morning sky as the first hints of dawn lit the horizon. The crisp air carried the scent of dew-covered grass and the faint rustle of leaves. Though his posture was straight and poised, a flicker of unease trembled in his shoulders. He was preparing for a journey he knew would change the course of his life. The southern packs awaited him, and he would soon take on the title of Alpha in the very lands once riddled with betrayal. He breathed in slowly, steadying himself. It was time to restore order, to honor his birthright, and to prove he could lead with both mercy and strength. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Raven, his twin sister, making her way down the steps. Despite the subtle fullness of her belly and Lucian's quiet protestations for her to move slowly, she descended with a determined grace. Her green eyes sparkled in the pale light, and Kieran could almost feel the echo of her power reaching out to him, that elemental warmth of fire that had always resided within her. She paused beside him, exhaling a soft laugh. "You look like you're facing an army, Kieran." He managed a faint grin. "Sometimes it feels that way. Going south isn't exactly a leisure trip." Raven reached out, placing a hand on his forearm. "You're ready. We were thrown into leadership before we ever expected it, but look how far we've come." He studied her face, finding both comfort and a flicker of guilt. "You always believed in me, even when I couldn't accept my own path. I don't want to fail them. I don't want to fail you." "You won't." Her voice carried unwavering conviction. "You're leading them for the right reasons, they'll see that." He nodded, taking solace in her words, though his heart still pounded at the thought of what waited for him in the south. The last Alpha Council there had sided with Gregor, betraying the Lycan Kingdom and nearly upending everything Raven and Lucian had built. Now those lands needed rebuilding, and he was the one to rebuild them. He only prayed the wolves in the south could see him not as another tyrant, but as someone who wanted to protect them. They stood in silence side by side, letting the cool morning air ground them. Kieran recalled how their journeys had begun. Raven, once a rogue with no place to call home, now stood as the Lycan Queen. He had hidden his identity for years, blending in and suppressing his scent to avoid scrutiny. They had come into their elemental powers together, forging bonds far deeper than they ever imagined. So much had changed, and this trip felt like another milestone in their shared destiny. He glanced at her, remembering the times they had tested their combined power, the surges of fire and wind that tore through enemies and saved their kingdom from destruction. She returned his look with a smile, as though reading his thoughts. In that moment, he felt the quiet hum of her magic resonate through the morning air, filling him with a sense of unity that neither time nor distance could break. Their moment of peace ended when Lucian arrived at Raven's side. He wore a deep blue tunic embroidered with silver threads, and though he greeted Kieran with a nod, his attention fixed on Raven. She greeted her mate with a fond look, and Kieran couldn't help but notice the slight crease of worry in Lucian's brow. Lucian reached out gently, letting his hand rest on Raven's forearm. "We should hurry if we want to beat the midday heat." His eyes shifted to her abdomen, and a playful note entered his voice. "Unless my queen would prefer a carriage ride instead of horseback?" Raven shook her head. "I've ridden horses all my life. Pregnancy won't stop me, though I appreciate the concern." He exhaled slowly, relief and apprehension mingling in his expression. "Just promise to tell me if you feel uncomfortable." She responded by taking his hand. "I promise I'll be careful, but I refuse to be treated like fragile glass." Kieran watched their exchange, a warmth kindling in his chest. Their bond had grown deeper with every challenge they faced. He was grateful for how Lucian cherished his sister, though he also found it amusing how anxious Lucian had become since Raven's pregnancy. Even in that brief exchange, Kieran caught the subtle tension in Lucian's shoulders and the protective edge to his voice. Behind Lucian's teasing, concern lingered. Before they set off, Ella emerged from the palace with Thalos and Darius in tow. Ella's gaze went first to Kieran, her lips curving into a smile at the sight of him. Their mutual affection was obvious, shaped by a shared bond that once frightened Ella, but that she had now embraced wholeheartedly. She walked up to him, brushing her fingertips over his arm, and for a moment, they shared a quiet exchange of warmth. Kieran inclined his head toward Ella with a soft smile. "Morning." She laughed gently, adjusting a pack slung over her shoulder. "You look like you've been up all night worrying." Raven snickered softly. "That's because he probably has." Ella's eyes darted to Raven. "Well, we'll just have to make sure he remembers to relax. You can't lead anyone if you're wound tighter than a spring, Kieran." He placed a hand over Ella's. "I'll keep that in mind, thank you." Darius cleared his throat in mock impatience while Thalos simply crossed his arms, quietly surveying the scene. Thalos had grown more introspective of late, though his loyalty had never wavered. Darius, in contrast, always carried a slight smirk that hinted at hidden humor. They mounted their horses and set out just as the sun broke fully over the horizon. Raven rode close to Lucian, while Kieran rode beside Ella. Thalos and Darius flanked the group, ever watchful. The ride south began in relative silence, broken occasionally by remarks about the weather or the state of the roads. The countryside gradually changed from rolling hills to flatter terrain, dotted with sparse clusters of trees. As they traveled, Raven and Kieran engaged in quiet conversation, recalling moments from their shared childhood when they hadn't realized they were siblings. "It still feels surreal," Raven confessed. "All those years we were apart, not even knowing of each other's existence." Kieran nodded, guiding his horse around a small rocky outcropping. "Now, we're twins with elemental powers who helped save the Lycan Kingdom. I never thought destiny would look like this." She offered a half smile. "Sometimes I wonder how many more surprises fate has in store." He eyed her for a moment before returning his gaze to the road. "I'm sure we'll find out, for better or worse." They paused to rest near a shallow creek midday, letting the horses drink. Lucian helped Raven dismount, fussing over her in a way that made her roll her eyes yet smile tenderly. Kieran watched as Lucian gently pressed his palm over Raven's belly, murmuring something too soft to hear. The affection between them was tangible. When Raven caught Kieran observing, she raised an amused eyebrow, as though to say, "You see what I deal with?" He grinned, shaking his head. Lucian's nerves were understandable. There was a growing life inside Raven, and as protective as he had always been, fatherhood had only magnified that instinct. Ella joined Kieran by the creek bank, crouching to swirl her fingers in the cool water. "He's sweet in his way," she said, nodding toward Lucian. "A little overprotective, but it's impossible to blame him." Kieran dipped his hand into the water as well. "If you think he's protective, you should see how he used to glare at me when he thought I might challenge Raven's decisions." Ella let out a soft laugh. "We've come so far since then. I remember the first time I saw you in the kingdom. You tried so hard to go unnoticed. Now you're leading half of it." He straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And you're right beside me, Luna-to-be." The faintest blush colored Ella's cheeks. Kieran found her modesty endearing. She was fierce in battle, but shy at heart when it came to personal compliments. They continued on, pressing deeper into southern territory. The land bore the scars of recent turmoil, broken fences, empty fields, and burnt remnants of small structures reminded them of the treachery that had rippled through these packs. By late afternoon, they caught sight of what had once been a bustling town. People eyed them warily from doorways as they passed, uncertain if this new alpha and his retinue were friend or foe. Kieran inhaled, steeling himself. Time to do this. He dismounted, motioning for the others to stay back for a moment. Ella insisted on following, so he let her come with him. Together, they approached a group of villagers who stared at them with guarded suspicion. Kieran raised his hands in a placating gesture. "My name is Kieran. I've come to help rebuild what was lost under Gregor's rule. The Alphas here betrayed the kingdom, but that doesn't mean you must remain in ruins." Silence stretched. An older woman stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "We've heard promises before." Kieran's voice wavered momentarily. I understand your distrust. That's why I want to earn your trust through action, not empty words. Ella, standing beside him, added softly, "We know you've suffered. If you'll allow us, we'll do everything possible to restore peace and prosperity." The woman studied them with a hard stare before her posture eased. "We'll see if you keep your word." Over the following hours, they traversed the area, speaking with families, listening to their grievances, and offering what aid they could. Raven and Lucian coordinated messages to be sent back to the kingdom to request supplies. Darius and Thalos set about helping rebuild a collapsed barn, and their hard work, despite their high status, spoke volumes to the wary villagers. By evening, the townsfolk appeared somewhat mollified, though caution still lingered in their eyes. Kieran felt a deep fatigue settling in, not merely physical, but emotional. His leadership was on trial, and he was determined not to fail. When they finally reached the southern pack castle, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting everything in shades of twilight. Even in the dim light, Raven could see the battered state of the castle's outer walls. Stones were blackened by soot, a relic of the clashes that had broken out when Gregor's allies turned traitor. The courtyard was strewn with rubble, and though the castle itself still stood firm, it bore the scars of conflict. Kieran paused at the gate. Ella stepped up beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. He looked down at her, gratitude in his eyes, before they entered the castle grounds. Lucian helped Raven dismount carefully, worry evident in the way he hovered, though she gestured for him to keep calm. Inside, the group took their first real survey of the structure by torchlight. Arched corridors led to a grand hall with high ceilings, where dusty tapestries hung in tatters, broken glass crunched underfoot, and the air carried a stale heaviness. Darius ran a hand along a fractured pillar, shaking his head. "It's going to take a lot of work," he muttered. Raven, however, lifted her chin. "Then we'll do it. This will be the seat of Kieran's authority. It should reflect hope, not ruin." They spent the next few days coordinating repairs, with the southern packs now warily gathering under Kieran's leadership. Laborers and volunteers arrived. They cleared debris, scrubbed away soot, and repaired shattered stone. Under Raven and Lucian's direction, the castle walls were soon restored to a gleaming white that caught the sunlight each morning. Banners of deep emerald and silver were hung from parapets, symbolizing unity and renewal. In the courtyard, workers planted rows of vibrant flowers, blooms of purple, pink, and gold, that seemed to breathe new life into the castle grounds. Inside, Thalos oversaw the replacement of broken windows while Darius helped patch the roof. Tapestries bearing the insignia of the southern pack, intricate designs of intertwined wolves, were carefully cleaned and mended. Polished wood floors emerged from layers of grime, reflecting torchlight at night and bathing the corridors in a warm glow. Ella took delight in arranging the refurbished halls with simple yet elegant decorations, wanting the space to feel welcoming. Bit by bit, the castle transformed into something bright and dignified, a living testament to the promise of a better future. Many in the southern packs watched in cautious awe, not fully trusting yet, but moved by the dedication shown by their new alpha and the Queen's retinue. Kieran, for his part, directed the renovations with a quiet resolve, holding frequent meetings with local leaders to address their concerns. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through newly replaced stained glass windows, Raven found Kieran and Ella in what had once been the old throne room of the Southern Alphas. They stood together, discussing structural changes to the dais. Kieran had decided to strip away remnants of the old rule, a symbolic fresh start. Ella pointed out cracks in the floor, suggesting ways to repair them. Raven approached, placing a hand lightly on Ella's shoulder. "How goes the planning for the Luna ceremony?" Ella looked both excited and uneasy. "It's overwhelming. Part of me still can't believe I'm about to become an official Luna. I only just embraced the bond with Kieran. Now everyone's looking to me to guide them." Kieran smiled, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You'll do fine. No, better than fine. You've stood by me through everything, And you've won people over without even trying. Just by being yourself. Ella's cheeks flushed, but she leaned into his touch. Thank you. I hope I can help these people feel safe and united. Raven squeezed her shoulder in encouragement. You've already done so much. This castle alone is proof of what unity can achieve. Later that evening, Kieran and Ella found a rare moment of peace. They slipped away from the bustle of renovations and ventured beyond the castle walls to a small lake nestled in a valley of rolling hills. The moonlight painted the water's surface in silvery streaks, and a soft breeze rustled the tall grasses at the shore. They settled on a flat rock by the water's edge, the scent of damp earth and wild flowers surrounding them. Ella dipped her fingers into the cool water, smiling as Kieran settled behind her, arms slipping around her waist. In the quiet of night, the distant sounds of construction faded, leaving them cocooned in an atmosphere of tranquility. I never imagined, Kieran said, voice low, that I'd find someone who truly understood me. I spent so much time trying to hide my identity. Ella turned slightly, resting her temple against his cheek. You don't have to hide anymore. You're not alone, Kieran. These packs will see your heart, just like I do. He breathed in her scent, letting the tension in his shoulders melt. I want to build something lasting here. A sanctuary for those who've been hurt by betrayal. A place where they can heal. And I want you to be by my side. Always. She laced her fingers through his. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Alpha. Her smile was soft, but her voice carried a teasing lilt. He chuckled, pressing a gentle kiss to her hair. Thank you for trusting me, Ella. They lingered there under the moonlight, speaking in hushed tones about the future, about the families who needed guidance, the children who had lost their parents in the fighting, and the new alliances they hoped to forge. The conversation drifted, too, to their personal hopes. Ella confessed her remaining nerves about the Luna ceremony, and Kieran reassured her that he would be right there, matching her every step. Meanwhile, in the castle, Raven wandered through the corridors by lamplight, checking on the final touches for the evening. Lucian accompanied her, his hand often resting on the small of her back. She'd tease him for being too protective, but secretly she relished the care he showed. She paused near a large window, watching the moon rise over the newly restored courtyard. Lucian followed her gaze. The place looks transformed. You did well, my queen. She smiled up at him. We all did. But it's only the beginning. Once the ceremony is complete and Kieran is fully accepted, we'll see how the southern packs respond in the long run. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Everything about this place feels new, like the entire territory is taking its first real breath in a long time. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. It reminds me of us. We came from so much strife, yet we forged a life together, and now we're expecting a child. He let his hand slide over her belly, his expression softening. I never thought I could be this anxious and this happy all at once. Raven laughed quietly. Welcome to parenthood, Lucian. They fell silent, savoring the calm. She thought back to the first time she'd realized Lucian was her mate, how she'd resisted and run, convinced she couldn't be worthy of him. Now she stood beside him, a queen carrying his heir, leading a kingdom that had once labeled her a rogue. Life had a way of turning impossibility into reality. The next day dawned with a flurry of activity. Workers and pack members hurried about, putting the finishing touches on the castle for Ella's Luna ceremony. Fresh flowers arrived by the cartload, filling the corridors with the fragrance of jasmine, roses, and other blossoms native to the south. Tailors delivered carefully crafted attire for the formal event, and the newly polished marble floors reflected every glimmer of torchlight. Ella spent much of the morning preparing in a sunlit chamber, with Raven by her side. She wore a gown of deep green silk adorned with silver accents, the color mirroring the banners draped throughout the castle. Raven helped secure the delicate fastenings, pausing occasionally to offer gentle reassurance when Ella's nerves surfaced. Ella gazed at her reflection in a newly polished mirror. I'm still half convinced someone else should be doing this. Raven gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You've proven yourself every step of the way, Ella. You have the heart of a Luna. You stand by your mate. You care about the wolves in your pack, and you lead with compassion. Ella turned, pulling Raven into a sudden embrace. Thank you. You've been like a sister to me. Raven returned the hug, smiling. We're all sisters in this pack in our own way. Now let's make sure you look as radiant as you feel inside. When the appointed hour arrived, the castle thrummed with anticipation. Pack members filed into the great hall, now awash in soft candlelight. Silver and emerald banners rippled along the high walls, and fresh flowers trailed around the pillars. A hush fell over the crowd as Kieran stood at the front, dressed in formal attire that carried subtle nods to the Southern Pack's symbols. His face showed a mix of excitement and a hint of trepidation. Ella entered on Raven's arm. Every eye turned to her and she took a steadying breath, reminding herself of the vow she was about to make to the Southern Packs and to her mate. The hush deepened, and she stepped forward, meeting Kieran's gaze. In that moment, the rest of the hall seemed to fade away. A respected elder from the south officiated the ceremony, speaking words that recalled ancient traditions of loyalty and unity. Kieran lifted his head, proclaiming his commitment to protect and guide the Southern Packs, while Ella voiced her vow to stand at his side, caring for the pack members as though they were family. Their voices echoed off the stone walls, carrying both solemnity and hope. Raven and Lucian watched from a few steps away. Raven felt tears prick her eyes as the ceremony progressed. She recalled her own doubts not long ago, and how Ella's unwavering spirit had carried her through many trials. Now Ella stood radiant and unafraid. Lucian slipped his hand into Raven's, giving it a gentle squeeze. Their gazes met, and she saw pride mirrored in his expression. In that instant, they felt not just like leaders of a kingdom, but also like two people witnessing the birth of a new era for those they cared about. As the ceremony reached its apex, a sudden ripple of tension passed through Raven. She glanced across the hall and spotted a figure near one of the arches, standing too still, eyes fixed on Ella. Her instincts flared. At the same time, Kieran's gaze snapped in the same direction, and Raven knew he sensed it too. Their twin bond hummed with a faint surge of elemental awareness. This was an intruder, or at least someone with ill intent. Their power stirred, not fully unleashed, but enough to create a gentle pulse in the air. A subtle wave of heat passed through the hall as Raven's fire magic responded to her emotion. Kieran's control over wind caused a faint draft to swirl around the intruder, an unspoken warning. The figure stiffened, realizing that the twins had noticed him. Without waiting for confrontation, he slipped away, vanishing into the hall shadows before anyone else seemed to recognize the threat. In the hush that followed, the ceremony concluded. Kieran and Ella exchanged vows, sealing their new status. Applause and howls of approval broke out among the gathered wolves. Ella's cheeks glowed, and Kieran lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture of devotion. Yet even as the crowd erupted in celebration, Raven and Kieran remained on edge, eyes flicking to the arch where the stranger had stood. The hall soon burst into jubilant chatter and congratulatory greetings. Wolves came forward to pledge their support to Kieran and Ella, while others took to the courtyard to continue the festivities under torchlight. Musicians played lively tunes, and trays of food and drink circulated. Darius led a cluster of warriors in a toast, while Thalos kept a watchful eye on the edges of the gathering. Ella and Kieran were swept into the swirl of well-wishers. The pair looked both exultant and relieved, fielding a whirlwind of greetings from Southern Pack members who now welcomed them as Alpha and Luna. Raven and Lucian hung back, scanning the crowd for any sign of the mysterious stranger. Once the ceremony's initial rush died down, they found Kieran and Ella in a quieter alcove, lit by the gentle glow of lanterns. "You felt that, didn't you?" Kieran asked, voice low. Raven nodded, exchanging a grim look with Lucian. "Yes. Whoever that was, they weren't here to celebrate." Ella drew in a slow breath. But they ran. Maybe they were just testing our defenses. Kieran took Ella's hand, tension radiating from him. We'll need to remain vigilant. The packs here are fragile after all that's happened. Another betrayal could ruin the unity we're trying to build. Lucian set a comforting hand on Raven's back. We'll figure out who they were. For now, let's make sure no one else panics. The people deserve a night of hope. They agreed to keep watch discreetly, not wishing to overshadow Ella's ceremony. The evening continued with music and dancing. Couples spun beneath hanging lanterns, their shadows stretching across the courtyard's polished stones. Kieran led Ella in a slow dance, their eyes seldom leaving each other's. Meanwhile, Raven stood with Lucian, occasionally stepping onto the dance floor with him, careful not to overexert herself. She could sense the life within her shifting gently, as though curious about the music that filled the night air. In a pause between dances, Lucian drew Raven aside to a secluded corner of the courtyard. Around them, the hum of celebration continued, but in that corner, the world felt quieter. He reached up to touch her cheek, concern and love mingling in his expression. "How are you feeling?" he asked, voice hushed. She smiled, relaxing into his touch. "I'm good. Tired, but I'm also happy." He bent his head closer. "I worry I'm smothering you with all my fussing." She laughed softly, curling her fingers around his wrist. "You are fussing, but I understand. I know you love me and our child, and I love you for it." His eyes flickered with relief. "I just want you safe. This child is everything." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "We will be safe because we have each other." Their moment was fleetingly interrupted by Darius, who approached with an apologetic look. "Pardon me, but we need you both to address the pack in a toast. They're calling for a final blessing from the Queen and her king." Lucian took Raven's hand, and they followed Darius to the center of the courtyard, where Kieran and Ella also stood. Torches flared, illuminating the new Alpha and Luna, the Queen and King, and the loyal allies who had made this moment possible. The crowd gradually fell silent. Raven let her gaze travel over the faces, some still lined with the worry of recent hardships, but many now filled with cautious optimism. She lifted her chin, pressing back her own uncertainties, and spoke in a clear voice. "Tonight, we celebrate not just an official ceremony, but the unity we have forged. This castle stands renewed, just as our bonds with one another stand renewed. Kieran and Ella promise a future built on trust and compassion. Lucian and I stand with them and with all of you to protect that future." Kieran added, "This isn't my kingdom alone. It belongs to all of us. I will lead, but I need your help. I need your faith that we can rebuild, not as fragments of a broken past, but as a pack that looks after its own." Ella's voice trembled only slightly. "I vow to serve as your Luna, to care for you in times of peace and in times of trial. I will listen to you, and I will strive to earn your trust." Lucian stepped forward, slipping his arm around Raven's waist. "We stand on the threshold of a new era. Let tonight be a promise that we do not run from the shadows, but meet them with courage, side by side." A quiet murmur ran through the crowd, followed by applause, howls of approval, and a sense of renewed hope. The music resumed, and the final hours of the celebration passed in a warm glow of camaraderie. Raven and Kieran exchanged a smile from across the courtyard, each privately recalling the fleeting presence of the stranger who had disrupted their sense of peace. A silent agreement passed between them. They would remain vigilant, but they would also allow their people to enjoy this moment of joy. As the festivities wound down, small groups gathered in conversation, while others drifted off to find rest. The moon hovered high, casting silver light over the castle's freshly polished stones. Thalos escorted the last of the guests to the castle gates, ensuring everyone departed safely. Darius took note of any outsiders who remained unaccounted for. The day had been long, and the night even longer, Yet the triumphant glow on Kieran and Ella's faces told Raven this journey had been worth every ounce of effort. Finally, the core group, Raven, Lucian, Kieran, Ella, Thalos, and Darius, found themselves standing in the moonlit courtyard, the echoes of celebration still lingering in the air. They were exhausted, yet invigorated, each aware of how precious such unity was. Ella glanced around, her green eyes reflecting the torchlight. "I can't believe we pulled this off." Kieran squeezed her hand. "You were amazing." Raven felt Lucian's arm slip around her shoulders. "This is only the beginning," she murmured, her mind already on whatever new challenges lay ahead. Darius nodded, dropping into a seat on a low wall. "We'll be ready for whatever comes." Thalos stood near a torch, his sharp gaze drifting over the dark corners of the courtyard. "This place has awakened, and so have its people." They shared a brief companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. An undercurrent of satisfaction pulsed through them, yet so did the subtle sense that not all was settled. A sliver of unease wound through the night, personified by the mysterious stranger who had vanished. Eventually, the group parted ways. Kieran and Ella retired to their newly prepared quarters, eager for a few moments of rest after the emotional strain of the ceremony. Raven and Lucian made their way to a chamber set aside for them, where a soft bed awaited. Darius and Thalos took on the responsibility of final patrol, though both men were equally exhausted. Within the private chamber, Raven removed the pins from her hair, letting it cascade across her shoulders. Lucian helped her with the laces of her gown, his movements slow and careful. Every time he touched her, she felt the quiet warmth of his concern. She turned to face him, studying the subtle lines of worry on his brow. "You're thinking about that stranger, aren't you?" she asked softly. He nodded, resting his hands on her waist. "It's not just that. I worry about you, about the child. We keep facing threat after threat." She slid her hands up his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "Our people needed to see hope tonight, and we gave them that. But yes, we'll stay vigilant." He exhaled, brushing his lips lightly across hers. "I'm with you, whatever comes." They settled into bed, Raven curled into the crook of his arm. Despite her exhaustion, it took her a long time to drift off. Her mind replayed the day's events, the proud look in Kieran's eyes as he assumed his rightful place, Ella's relief and joy at being accepted, the cheering crowd's gratitude, and the flicker of a stranger's malevolent gaze. She feared that the peace they had forged remained delicate. The kingdom had endured too many betrayals to rest easy. Eventually, her weariness overcame her. She fell into dreams of winding corridors and moonlit lakes, of banners fluttering in soft breezes, and of the silent figure slipping away into the shadows. Yet amid the uncertainty, one truth shone through. She was not alone. She had Lucian, Kieran, Ella, Darius, and Thalos, an unbreakable circle of bonds that would stand against any darkness. When dawn broke, the castle stirred to life again. Voices murmured in the halls, footsteps echoed along the freshly polished floors, and servants prepared morning meals. Raven woke to the gentle light filtering through the high windows, Lucian's arm still cradling her protectively. She shifted carefully, pressing a hand to her abdomen as a soft flutter reminded her of the child growing within. She rose and dressed, determined to greet the new day with resolve. In the corridor, she found Kieran and Ella already awake, speaking with one of the southern pack leaders about distributing supplies. Both appeared energized, the ceremony success clearly fueling them with a newfound confidence. Kieran caught sight of Raven and nodded in greeting. "Morning." Ella Sonrio. "We were just about to check the storerooms." Raven joined them, her steps echoing on the cool stone. "I'll come with you. We can see what needs restocking, and maybe plan how to improve the distribution for the villages around here." Even as she spoke, her mind flickered back to the fleeting threat from the night before. She shared a glance with Kieran, sensing he was thinking the same thing. They would keep rebuilding, keep strengthening ties, and keep a close watch on whatever shadows lurked. That was the price of leadership. Yet she also felt a tender glow of hope. They had forged love and unity in the aftermath of war. She had seen Kieran's compassion shine, seen Ella's devotion inspire others, and felt Lucian's steady heart beating alongside her own. Whatever new trials the future held, they would face them, just as they always had. Together. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Raven quietly reminded herself that life was about balance. Balancing fear with courage, heartbreak with joy, past with future. For every hidden danger that lay in wait, there was a promise of warmth and light. And for every uncertain path, there was the unwavering bond of a family built not just by blood, but by love. She placed a hand gently over the subtle curve of her belly, feeling the steady pulse of new life. In that touch was a vow: to protect, to nurture, and to keep forging forward. In the silent halls of the newly restored castle, the future beckoned, and she and her companions would answer its call with strength and unity.